Okay, now we're going live on YouTube. Okay, it's the go live. Okay, so I'm set, so I can take this down in 1 minute. Okay, so I'm going to still on the pin. Okay, I'm going to spotlight Susan. And okay, I'm going to stop my share now so you can start. Okay.
Welcome to the Forum for World Education webinar this morning. The forum was begun approximately 4 years ago to bring together education leaders, education researchers, along with members of the international business community to look at education and what we need to do to prepare our young people for the future. The forum is focusing the next 3 webinars on what we've learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. In this webinar, we're focusing on the Unesco Iea Report on what happened at the beginning of the pandemic, what impact that had on secondary teachers and students, and insights for policymakers for future crises. The report included data from education systems in Europe, Africa, Asia, and South America. In April, we'll focus on the OECD report, which has a greater list of countries and areas that participated. And it looks further in at how systems work to continue education during the closure and reopening of schools across the world. And then in May, we're going to look specifically at what's happening in the United States. So we will bring in researchers from the United States to talk about what the impact has been here. And we will look at how this information from the 3 webinars can lead us forward to improve the quality of education provided for young people across the world. At this time, I would like to introduce our program for today. We're looking at the report from UNESCO and IEA, and we're very fortunate to have with us Dirk Hasted, Executive Director at the International Association for the Evaluation of Educational Achievement, which is IEA. And we invited him because he had worked so closely with the UNESCO program, and IEA is known internationally for the quality of the research that it does, and particularly for the TIMS look at math and science, as well as the PEARLS, which looks at reading performance across the world. So we are lucky to have Dirk with us live, but we're going to first move to his presentation, which is on tape, and then we'll come back and talk with Dirk about the presentation. We'll also introduce our other members of the group at that time. Origin Originasia from Rwanda is joining us. He is one of the young leaders associated with the Forum for World Education, and we look forward to his comments as an education and education entrepreneur working with young people in Rwanda and across Africa. So at this time, we will move directly to Dirk's presentation. And when we come back, we'll have the great advantage of speaking live with him. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now you can share the presentation. Perfect. Hello.
Hello, my name is Dirk Hasted. I'm the Executive Director of IEA, and today I would like to talk about the consequences of COVID-19 for world education and a vision for the future. Hello. Hello. My name is Dirk Harstedt. I'm the Executive Director of the IEA. And today I would like to talk about the consequences of COVID-19 for world education and a vision for the future.
I know, it's fine.
Let me briefly introduce the IEA. The IEA is an international association for the evaluation of educational achievement.
Okay.
We are
good.
a non-governmental research organization founded originally in 1958. An independent international cooperative of national research institutions and governmental research agencies are our members. And we are conducting large-scale comparative studies of educational achievement and other aspects of education since 1958. We have more than 60 member countries and institutions, and nearly 100 education systems participate in IEA studies. You can see that our membership ranges from Armenia to the United States. We have members in Europe, in the Americas, in Asia, in Africa, as well as Australia and New Zealand as our members, who are actively participating in our studies. Currently, we're running 4 different studies. Number 1 is the TIM study, the Trends in International Mathematics and Science study. In TIMS, we are collecting data from grade 4 and grade 8 students since 1995, and we do that every 4 years. Besides achievement data with respect to mathematics and science, we also collect huge background information from students, from their mathematics and science teachers, from school principals, and in grade 4 also from the parents. In our Progress in International Reading Literacy study, we are collecting data since 2001, and we do that every 5 years. We are assessing the reading literacy abilities of grade 4 students, and also here collect the same rich background data as we do in TIMS. In our International Civic and Citizenship Education study, we are collecting trend data since 2009. And also this study is done cyclically, so we regularly collect data in participating countries. In our International Computer Information Literacy study, we are collecting trend data since 2013, every 5 years. And we're looking at computer literacy of grade 8 students. All these students are collecting trend data for a long time. And with this data, we can look into achievement, but also what is related to the achievement level of the students. In the COVID-19 situation, the IEA has launched 3 more studies. We have the Response to Educational Disruption survey that we are doing in partnership with Unesco and the European Commission. In RADS, we have collected data from school principals and teachers and students. No assessment was done, but we collected a huge amount of background information. And I will talk about some of the results later on. In the continuity and changes of the schools in times of crisis, we are collecting in partnership with the University of Hamburg and the IPN in Kiel data in Germany. The Icls teacher panel is based on the most recent study of Icls, and we collected longitudinal data from teachers. So we approached the same schools again and collected data from teachers about their perception of COVID-19 situation. And I will also give you some examples later on of these findings here. In general, I see the situation very changing and fluctuating. And that is within and also across countries. We see that there are lockdowns countrywide, but also certain schools are effective of not being able to teach students. What we see is a constant request for information about what are the impacts, long-term impacts, and what's the current situation of learning in different schools in different countries. So what it seems to be clear is that we need data and evidence to inform policy. We never got so many requests as in the recent 2 years about our work and the results from our studies. And it's very important and critical to identify possible directions and the topics that we need to work on to tackle equity and the inclusion in our school systems. But beyond the recent studies on COVID-19, we can also draw some conclusions from the data we collected previously and before the COVID-19 situation hit our education systems. So there is information from TIMSS 2019 and Icls that can inform policy. So let me come to some results from TIMSS 2019 that I found very surprising, but also very important in the current situation. In TIMSS, as I said, we are measuring trend in grade 4 and grade 8 for students, and the last data collection has taken place in 2019, so just before the COVID-19 crisis hit our schools. We have huge background information from mathematics and science teachers, students, and the parents of the grade 4 students. We have data from 64 countries and 8 sub-entities within countries. And we assessed more than 600,000 students worldwide. And with TIMSS 2019, we have 24 years of trend data available. But let's come to one of the results that I found very surprising. There's a lot of discussion currently about the availability of computers and tablets in the COVID-19 crisis, because students were supposed to learn at home. And in many countries, digital learning was one of the main streams to continue teaching and learning, also in times of crisis, when schools had to be closed due to COVID-19. And we found in TIMSS 2019 that 11% of the students had no computer or tablet available on average across all countries. But what I found even more surprising is that 17% of the students reported that they had no study desk and no quiet place to work at. And even though it might be easier to equip students with a computer or tablet, although it's costly, it's much, much more difficult, of course, to also ensure that students have a quiet place to work if they cannot go to school but have to learn at home. And we can see that the differences are, of course, different in different countries, with, of course, more of the students not being equipped with computers and a quiet place to work in South Africa than in many other countries. But we always see the same picture, that the percentage of students that do not have a study desk is usually higher than the ones that have no computer or tablet at home. And what we can also see is that the students who are affected the most were those who already had challenging learning situations before. So we looked at the low international benchmarks, so low achieving students, and advanced achieving students. And we looked for both of these groups of students at their availability of study desk and also of computers. And for the study desks, these are the results that I'm showing here, as well as for the computers, we saw huge differences of the percentage of students affected by not being well equipped. The lower achieving students are usually the ones that are less well equipped. So their learning situation when schools are closed is tremendously more affected by these shortages. But as I said, we also conducted some other studies. We have the Icls teacher panel, and in the teacher panel, we collected data in Denmark, Finland, and Uruguay. And that's a panel study where we looked at the technology-based learning in the context of COVID-19. One result that we found in Icls 2018 is that the dominant factor for teachers using ICT was the teacher's self-efficacy. In Icls, we ask school principals, technical coordinators, teachers, as well as students, what's a major obstacle of not using ICT in teaching and learning in schools? And from all these sources, we got the same answer. It's usually the teachers. And if the teachers don't have the self-confidence to use computers in teaching and learning, then that hinders the usage tremendously. And that was a dominant factor that we found in 9 countries out of the 9 countries that participated in that part. So we see ICT self-efficacy is very, very important for teachers making use of computers in education. We find in 2020 a much higher percentage of teachers across the 3 participating countries that reported using digital tools compared to 2018. And I guess we are not surprised about that because, as we said, learning usually, or in a lot of cases, happened using digital methods. But what we also could see is that the ICT self-efficacy reported by the teachers increased substantially in the 3 countries. And we saw the highest increase for Uruguay, where prior to the pandemic, 62% of the teachers reported that they know how to use a learning management system. Whereas in 2020, when we asked the teachers, 92% of the teachers said that they know how to use a learning management system. So the self-confidence and the self-efficacy that teachers have increased significantly in the times of crisis. And mostly, as you can see here, in Europe.
Oh, good.
In 2020, we saw also a higher percentage of teachers who agreed with the statement that their school has good connectivity to the internet. And again, we see in Uruguay the largest increase of schools reporting that they have good connectivity. So we see a lot of investment obviously has taken place. And that is important when we have to go for remote teaching. One of the positive effects of the COVID-19 crisis. Now I will come also to some findings from our response to educational disruption survey. RADS is not just another COVID-19 survey. The data from RADS are unique for 3 reasons. Number 1, while many other efforts exist that collected data and provide similar information, they are mostly derived from non-representative rapid surveys and lack this internationally comparable information from schools collected in a systematic and scientific manner. RADS data provides robust and reliable data that have been collected based on the high IEA quality standards, using representative, large, random probability samples in all countries. Secondly, RADS offers a comparative picture of the situation at the secondary education level in 11 countries, and these are spanning from Africa to Asia, the Arab region, Europe, and Latin America. So it's a real global study of COVID-19. The uniqueness of the group of countries that participates in RADS really speaks to its global character and sets it apart from many other studies. And lastly, RADS collected data on a range of topics, and one in particular that stands out is that RAD offers insights into teacher and students' well-being during the educational disruption. It's not only about achievement levels, but it's also about well-being. And I think this is very important and a focus that sometimes is forgotten. A main objective of RADS was to acquire a clear picture of the situation in a variety of educational systems around the world. And from RADS, what we learned is the following. Although teaching and learning continued in many countries using alternative delivery models, no schooling at all was provided for between 20% to 85% of all responding students in countries with lower Human Development Index. So Burkina Faso, Rwanda, Kenya, Ethiopia, and India. During long school closures, countries took alternative avenues to continue learning, such as on television and radio. For example, 97% of the schools in Uzbekistan, 69% of the schools in Russian Federation, and 65% of the schools in India used audio or video lesson provided as television or radio broadcast. And that's sometimes forgotten. We always think of the development world and how computers are used. But there's also other ways to continue teaching and learning. RADS findings also indicate that more effort is needed to support the most vulnerable students. Between 1/4 and 1/2 of students, so a significant percentage, across all countries, reported they had no one at all available to help them with their schoolwork, at least sometimes. The highest figure was found in Denmark with 51% of the students. Overall, Uzbekistan reported the highest levels of support for remote schooling from different groups of people. Most teachers across countries agreed that it was difficult to provide especially the lower achieving and most vulnerable students with the support that they required. RADS collected data from school leaders, teachers, and students, also about their perception of the student learning progression during the period of disruption. And also here the emphasis on vulnerable students was also seen in respect to learning progress. Between 25% and 85% of the principals stated that they believed that generally academic outcomes of all students in their schools decreased due to the pandemic. 25% was found in the United Arab Emirates and 85% in Slovenia. So from the school perspective, we see that a learning gap probably has occurred. The reported decreases in student academic outcomes during COVID-19 pandemic applied especially to the most disadvantaged and vulnerable students. In Uruguay, for example, as much as 79% of the school principals believed academic outcomes of students from low-income backgrounds decreased due to the experience of the pandemic. And consistent with this view of the school principals, also the majority of teachers agreed that their student learning progress had not advanced to the extent that teachers would normally have expected. At the time of the year. This added to the finding that most teachers across countries agreed that it was difficult to provide necessary support for the vulnerable students. And students struggling with the academic workload. Also disconcerting is that in all countries, students with low socioeconomic background were more likely to worry about their future education and falling behind in learning. In the case, for example, of Burkina Faso, 74% of the students from low SES background reported anxiety about falling behind. Additionally, students with low SES were less confident in completing schoolwork independently and were more likely to not feel prepared for school closures. These consistent and important findings underline the need for future understanding on identifying those students and developing tailored measures to better aid them in future, especially during disruptions, but also after disruptions, to see how can they be keeping up with the other students. And it's worth noting that similar findings were seen for students with. But REDS is also a story about resilience and how countries, schools, teachers, and students are adapting to these challenges. And one unique aspect about REDS data is that it offers multiple perspectives from school principals, students, and teachers on the student and teacher well-being and the support that was available to them during the educational disruption. Data from REDS reveal that the importance of schools extends beyond teaching and learning. Global school closures caused by COVID-19 pandemic call attention to the multifaceted role of schools as important ecosystems, underlining the need to educational prioritize teacher and student well-being. Both students and teachers reported challenges in their well-being during the disruption. Next to feeling overwhelmed by the pandemic, over half of students on average across all countries agreed that they were anxious about the changes to their schooling. In countries where teaching and learning continued, teachers' workload generally increased significantly, and they worked harder to support the students, but also the parents of the students. School responded to these demanding circumstances by putting additional effort into supporting the well-being of their staff and students. Half or more of school principals in most countries increased priorities for promoting student and teacher well-being during school closures. And despite the challenges to overall well-being, data from REDS showed that the vast majority of teachers felt supported by the staff and by the schools. And for the students, half or more of the school principals in most countries increased priority for the student well-being. Most students also reported feeling supported by the schools, with about 2/3 or more of students across countries agreeing that classmates were supportive of each other. So we see that it's really an ecosystem with teachers supporting students, but also students supporting each other, and teachers and students being supported by the principals with respect to their well-being. So the question, of course, is now, where do we go from here? We are currently looking into another cycle of REDS Plus, and we saw that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And together with UNESCO, we are exploring if it's possible to have another REDS survey in additional countries, but maybe also in the countries that we already surveyed. We want to evolve the scope and the focus of how education has adapted and how this transforming and these changes of education might remain in the education systems. Very interestingly, at the end of this year, data from PEARLS will be released. There was data collection delayed in some of the participating countries, but we have huge amount of data, not only achievement, reading achievement data from students, but also background data from students, from their homes, and from teacher questionnaires. In our encyclopedia, we will also give information what the countries reported with respect to the situation of teaching and learning during COVID-19. And the PEARLS 2021 data will be the first data from an international large-scale assessment that will be published and that will capture the achievement and learning levels during the current crisis. So I'm looking forward to December when we see if really the results that are reported by principals and teachers will be manifested in the student outcomes. So, to summarize, digital equipment was used in many countries to continue teaching and learning during the pandemic. We have seen that the digital competencies among teachers and the teachers' self-efficacy has grown, and computers were used more in schools to continue teaching and learning. But we also saw that learning outside schools is not only about digital equipment, but it also requires quiet space to learn. And this is not available to all students, especially students from low SES background and lower achieving countries are in a disadvantaged position here. So based on the existing data, we can expect students have not learned as much as they did in previous year, which is usually referred to as a learning loss. And we saw that this affects mostly the vulnerable students. And with the release of PEARLS 2021, we will see if that's actually the case. But most importantly, schools are more than just a place to learn, and if schools are closed, it has a significant impact also on students and teachers and parents' well-being. So there's a huge emphasis also on the well-being of students and teachers that took place in the COVID-19 crisis due to the immense efforts that principals and teachers have taken. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to an interesting, fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate the presentation, and we will proceed at this point. Wilfred Hartman is going to be our moderator today, and so I would like to turn it over to Wilfred. Wilfred is a member of the Forum for World Education Academic Committee, and he is also the person behind organizing this particular webinar. So welcome, Wilfred, and we look forward to your moderation.
Hello, Susan. Thank you very much for taking over. I suffered from a strike at the airport security, so that's why I'm a little bit late. But I saw that everything is running fine, and so my first after this apology is to thank you very much, Dirk, for the overview of these results of the REDS study, and especially for putting them into the context of earlier research and showing how earlier findings can be used in today's situation. It is my pleasure now to introduce today's panel of discussants, or did you do that already, Susan? Okay. Our discussants today are coming from 3 continents, and I'm sure that this panel is eager to comment and discuss Dirk's contribution. In alphabetical order, I welcome Dr. Slovilsky from Poland. Hello.
Hello, welcome.
He looks back at 17 years of research and teaching at various universities in Łódź and Warsaw in the field of media and distance education and didactics. And after serving as a director of the education department in the local government of Łódź, he is now director of Learnhood, an institution offering pedagogical support for parents. And during the first 2 years of the pandemic, he implemented, in addition, e-learning at 3 universities. We are glad to have you here.
Thank
And
you.
now we turn to Origen Yiranesa. He is a Forum for World Education young leader from Rwanda, founder and CEO at Genius Priority Limited, a software startup that develops mobile and web solutions in the areas of education, service delivery, and other related IT areas. Previously, he served as the national president for Junior Chamber International in Rwanda, a non-profit international NGO of active young citizens engaged and committed to positive impact. I don't know whether you can see him already. Sometimes the connection via internet is so weak that he prefers just to be heard and not to be seen, but I'm sure we will see him if nothing else happens later. And the last, but by no means the least, is Dr. Susan Sclafani, Vice President and Steering Committee member of the Forum for World Education. She is a former US Department of Education Assistant Secretary for Vocational and Adult Education, and was the US Education Representative to OECD and APEC, and led the Mathematics and Science Initiative, the High School Redesign Initiative, and the e-learning project with the Chinese Ministry of Education. Susan works at the Houston Independent School District, led the district even to win the first World Prize for Outstanding Urban Districts, and is, as I told you now, a very helpful member of our steering committee, as you could see when she took over while I was not available. Thanks again. Now, Dr. Hasted told us about the policy and practice responses of secondary school systems to the pandemic situation. All countries participating in REDS or REDS created policy and/or guidelines documents to assist schools in responding to the COVID-19 disruption, including measures to ensure pedagogical continuity and hygienic measures for the eventual return to school. Being in the very lucky situation to be joined today by a panelist from the continent with the highest number of participating countries and whose home country, Rwanda, is one directly involved in the study, I cannot resist to ask Origen whether he confirms the IEA findings, for example, with respect to the continuity or non-continuity of teaching and learning, and to alternative deliberate methods which were used, or whether he would like to get more detailed information from Dirk Hasted. Origen, I would be happy if you could let us know what your impression of the situation and this contribution is.
Thank you very much, dear Wilfried, for the moderation and a great introduction. And good afternoon or good morning to everyone, depending to the time zone that you're in. Well, I had look into the report, and also I found some of the things that have happened during the period of the pandemic when it hit, and also putting into consideration what my company does in the solution that we offer, specifically in the secondary schools here in Rwanda, in delivering interactive content that is teaching and learning majorly on STEM-related subjects. So in response to the question that you asked me, I think I have to start by at least echoing some of the responses that have been put in place when the pandemic hit. That goes into the introduction of homeschooling and remote learning, and also looking at the way some of the resources, education resources that have been distributed to various places in where the students were based, radio and TV broadcasting, and also sharing some of the educational materials via social media. Those have been some of the key major mediums that were used while the pandemic hit, but they came with challenge. And some of these challenges were enumerated in the reports, though as Rwanda, one of my country that was put into the report, there are some of the areas that the report couldn't touch, which I was interested to see, most especially in the area of inequalities of what have happened in the country. And we've seen imbalance in learning and the learning progress for the students, those who were in urban places versus those who were in rural places. And there was limited access to internet, and in so many places, also the learning resources which couldn't reach to many places, or even the digital devices. You know, we are considered part of the poor country that is transitioning to middle income country. So the infrastructure in place was not that strong in order to respond fully to the demand that was there when the pandemic hit. So looking at the learning outcomes, I would say by a fact, it was even confirmed by a report that the mindset shift that have happened more in all angles, from student perspective to learners' perspectives, or even school leaders. Before the pandemic, it was hard for them to be convinced that ICT could play a major role in teaching and learning, which has changed when the pandemic presented to them without any other alternative to use while they are teaching. And we've seen also schools, some of the schools changing the way they were operating in terms of letting some of the school resources, meaning letting teachers to take some of the school resources at their homes so that they could facilitate the homebound teaching and learning. They could give them computers or even facilitate them to get internet connection. However, there are places where such kind of support couldn't be given, most especially in rural areas, or some of the places where the school leadership felt they were not concerned to respond to the challenges that were happening. And another thing that have happened was a huge involvement and engagement of parents in learning of their kids. At least parents can confirm that once in their lives they became teachers, and that was the necessity that brought with the lockdowns, when they were at home with their kids without regular involvement of teachers in following up of learning of the kids. At least they had to chip in and help students to finalize some of the school works. So it was a huge contribution, and it also brought in another perspective of what can be done moving forward, because we are also thinking of the future. And on that perspective, we can also look at the other areas and other challenges that have happened. Like, so many people lost jobs, and those include some of the teachers who couldn't continue to do their profession when we were into the lockdown. So I was also interested to look into the effect of what that have done on the education ecosystem in general. Let's see how many people who dropped out of teaching career and how was the effect of missing them. And we can also look into the area of in a country like mine, Rwanda, where at least teachers spent 8 months without teaching, and those who couldn't have resources to continue online teaching. So was interested to also see what was that meant to them in terms of the learning losses or even teaching losses that have happened. So these are some of the avenues that we're interested, because I can give you like an example. When in Rwanda, the school, they decided to reopen the schools in November. In just a few days, we saw hundreds of teachers subscribing on the platform, and majority of them were coming in the rural areas. And we were interested to learn about what caused that to happen, so that they could come in huge numbers. And one of the reasons were like they spent time without teaching, and they couldn't, they lost some of the knowledge that they could use in teaching. And so how could that have been affected the learning and teaching outcomes in general? So that is some of another area that I was interested to look into. And also the students and teachers' well-being, where we spoke about like some of those who lost their jobs, and also the way that could have contributed to the families, and also how they could assist learners. We saw in our platform, Genius Panda, which we use to help students continue learning from any place they are at, that there was an issue that some of them were at certain point not engaged in the learning, and later on we had to implement some of the techniques to keep them connected, because there was a huge need for them to interact, share resources, and even seek for support. And that couldn't, that even if we did that response, we also understand that couldn't lead to the majority of learners, given that we have thousands of students who were at home and who couldn't have access to these resources. And that's where we are also looking at the effect of the learning losses that created imbalance when the schools reopened. We could find, I guess there was even a frustration to teachers when they could bring together students who have really advanced by following all this, remote learning, versus those other ones who couldn't get anything while they were at home. So I'm also interested to learn about how it went to my fellow panelists, if somebody has another experience, so that we can make this useful. But in the end, what I wanted to also share here is that there was so many changes that happened, and also brought by the COVID pandemic. And we've seen that there was positive sides and the negative sides. On the positive side, we realized that, at least here in Rwanda, the government got time to build more classrooms. They made a record of building around 25,000 new classrooms in the country, and also thinking of the new infrastructure and supplying schools with internet connection as well as electricity. But
Great.
again,
okay, Origin, that's very nice to hear that there were really positive aspects as well. And I would follow your advice and listen to the other panelists as well. Dirk, whenever you want to interfere, please don't hesitate. If you see that one of our panelists has totally different experience than you from your studies, or you are interested to dig deeper into special countries, results, experiences, programs, please let us know. I just would like to collect some more impressions, and as the country group with the next highest number of participating countries is Europe, I ask now Dobroslav, coming from Poland, and around him there is Denmark, there's the Russian Federation, a little bit to the southwest is Slovenia. So this Eastern or Northern Europe part of the world has its own experience as well, but I'm really interested in the situation you encountered in Poland. If you could let us have some ideas of that and change it with us.
It was very difficult time for Polish students, pupils, and for Polish teachers, and the system, school system, was not prepared for that situation. In fact, the first weeks of the problem, the schools needed to collect the equipment and the knowledge about how teach using e-learning. From the other hand, e-learning wasn't prepared for pupils of primary schools, even secondary schools. It's not time, especially with Polish experience, teaching by internet or using internet. And in fact, it was very big problem, because it wasn't so difficult to connect teachers and pupils by internet. But in fact, it was the biggest problem, as I saw in the last years in Polish education, to change the competences of teachers to work online. And these competences were very low. From the other hand, when I tried to work with teachers of high schools, of universities, to start working by the e-learning, using e-learning, I saw that it was very difficult for them. Teachers from primary and secondary schools made it much faster and much easier, with much more passion, and they really wanted to work with the pupils. They didn't know how, but they wanted to learn with pupils. And the effect is that there was a big, unbelievable problem to keep learning in the situation where all traditionals ways of learning were completely ineffective. And two results of it. First, the deep between the pupils which really know how to learn. They have these competitions. They work because they are very organized, and they know how to work with the names, what they need to do. And between the pupils which don't know how to learn, and they don't know how to work alone, it's much deeper than it was. Because for the pupils which know how to learn, the time of e-learning in a school, it was good time, very good time, to to learn themselves much more effectively, with much without losing time for traveling to school, from backing from school and other situations. But for the pupils which didn't know how to work, how to learn themselves, it was time without any effect. So this dip between these two groups of pupils is now much higher than it was earlier. And the other problem is the problem of, and the effect, it's a problem of teachers. The traditional teachers, the teachers which are basing on a completely traditional ways of teaching and building relations between teacher and pupil, they are in a very bad situation, and their effective of their work were very slow. But the modern teachers, with modern ideas, with a much more open mind, how to build the connection between pupils and teachers, it's much better time. So in fact, we saw it in secondary schools as a specific effect. Sometimes this is, for example, it was a class which main profile is for example biological or chemistry, but because of low competences of these teachers of these subjects, in fact this pupils are now much better educated, for example, if in a native language or foreign languages, or for example history, even if it's not their profile. There's nothing what they wanted to learn. They decided to use other profile, and this is, in my opinion, these are very difficult. These are very big problems now when we are trying to back to the traditional school, because the signs of the first year of pandemic school are very hard, and are very now makes much more problems than we expected earlier.
Thank you very much for this contribution, though I really am not happy with the negative aspect in the end, but we are offering these series of webinars to find out in the end what we can do to overcome these problems and to catch up with what is necessary. Susan, now you are there for the rest of the world. There were 3 countries not covered by those Origin and Dorislav spoke about, and that are those, let's say, from Asia and from the Americans. But first of all, we would like to hear your just personal impression of what's happened in your countries, and if you have an overview over others, please share those with us as well. Susan.
Thank you. You know, I believe that even though the United States was not directly participating in this study, that the conclusions that were drawn across the world, in fact, are very applicable here. We see many of the same trends. We see also a major concern, as Dobroslav mentioned, that when schools returned, in many cases, they went back to traditional strategies. And in fact, the students, those who had enjoyed learning independently, were dismayed that suddenly they were expected to sit through lectures again when this was not their optimal mode of learning. And for other students, we've heard the same concerns about being worried that they have fallen behind, particularly our disadvantaged students, and they don't know quite what they're going to be able to do in order to improve their learning. So the issues are really very much across the world. I think also that as we think back to what Dirk was saying, we see the value of having these trend data lines established in our subject areas, because it is really the only way we're going to start to see what has happened. And in many cases in the United States, states did not do their annual testing because they believed that that would be unfair to the students. But in fact, I believe that it was more a concern about how the performance would be reflecting on their school system, that they did not continue the testing. So this year, 2022-23, will be, the spring of 22 will be the first time that any of the states have done any testing. And again, some are not planning to do that now either. So I think that one of our major challenges is exactly what our viewer questioned, namely, how are we going to ensure that in the future our students are better prepared for independent learning? And it will not happen if we continue the same strategies of teaching that we have had in our schools in the past, where students were simply expected to absorb the information provided, and that was described as learning if they could repeat it back on a test on a short-term basis. We started FWE for exactly this reason. This level of education, this kind of education, is simply not preparing children across the world for the world in which they're going to grow and live. We see that from our companies. We see that in the increasing gaps between those students who have very high quality teachers who are using much more engaging strategies, and the students who do not have access to either well-prepared teachers or to teachers who are willing to learn how to use a variety of strategies. I think that the PEARLS data will be extremely helpful, and the next TIMSS data will as well, because in math and science, I think we're going to see even greater losses than we saw in reading. At least students continue to read, if only to continue doing some assignments during the time. Others became engaged in reading for learning and followed their own curiosity and interests and learned a great deal. So the gap is definitely going to widen between the students who have had differential experiences with the quality of education and the strategies used to help them develop as learners. So I think that the data is going to be absolutely critical, but the other part is going to be then, how do we help transform education across the world? How do we help teachers develop these competencies? I mean, that's what Dobroslav was talking about. You know, the teachers who were enthusiastic about it, and I'm not surprised that it was more of the elementary school teachers, because they are the ones so focused on their students that they respond to the reactions that they get. They respond to the fact of some things engaging students and other strategies not engaging them. And so they're going to really try to maximize the strategies of engagement. But I think also that the value of this study is that we saw very, very different responses to the pandemic, and in terms of opening schools, whether that was with masks on or without masks on. But when schools did not reopen, the children had no opportunity, for the most part, to learn in ways that were going to move them forward as independent learners, to learn them forward as young people who are able to guide their learning through their own interests and curiosity. So I think the next 2 years of data are going to be very important, but even more important will be how we can help teachers develop appropriate strategies to be able to respond to the gap between groups of students. I noticed also in the report that it talked about teachers deciding to focus on only certain areas of the curriculum. which might make sense in some ways, but when you think that individual teachers making those decisions, it means that the students are going to have such a variety of past learning experiences when they're brought together, for example, next year, where everyone is going to be mixed up and assigned to teachers, regardless of who and what strategies were used the prior year. It's going to be incredibly difficult for our teachers to lead classrooms that are engaging both for the underprepared, unprepared, and those who have kept up their learning either because parents were able to hire tutors or create pods, which happened a lot in this country in our wealthier school districts, where parents just independently contracted with teachers to provide ongoing education because they were dissatisfied with what the school was producing. So I think that Dirk is going to have a major task ahead of him as well as a major opportunity to help us in all of these regards.
Thank you, Susan, for these additional remarks and slowly putting us into the direction to ask for suggestions to Dirk what to include in the REDS Plus study, which wishes we have or which aspects we consider necessary. But Dirk, it's now your chance to react. I would appreciate to hear your impression and your reactions to some of the remarks by our panelists, if that suits you.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. Everything I heard from the discussion, I think I can agree to. I think you raised very, very important points. And when I listened to Regine, I think you're right that students were taught by parents in a significant way in many countries. So that's clearly right. And probably that also has shown the importance of teacher and maybe also the respect to teachers, because parents have seen that it's a tremendous job. We also saw, on the other hand, that teachers were also helping parents if they became unemployed or whatever. Then the parents stepped up and really also helped the parents. And I think that's also one thing that we need to recognize, that also teachers have shown a lot of initiatives and activities beyond their normal teaching duties. On the other hand, what we also saw, if we look at the family background, that I think it was in Burkina Faso, that about half of the students reported that they also had to take care of siblings. So there were additional family duties also in these times of school closures that also took away time from learning. And that's something that we have to recognize. And that's probably also in line with what Susan said, that will probably also increase the gap between the different students that we, I think, all agree probably has happened. I also agree to what Dobroslav said, that there's a difference between primary and secondary students. And that's also what we saw in studies in Germany, the quick study that we conducted. That different methods were used, and this digitalization was more the way in secondary schools and primary schools. There was still a lot of paper and pencils, and teachers driving around and giving papers to the students and collecting tasks. So there's definitely also differences that we see between primary and secondary education. And I think you're also right that we see differences between students who know how to learn and who were mostly with these frontal teaching styles, or this traditional teaching style usually. So there's a lot of differences, and we need to see that we get students up to speed. And I saw that how can we train students to become more autonomous learners? Yeah, I think that's an important aspect. And I think that is where we are going to. And I think the COVID-19 crisis in this respect has, for many teachers and classrooms, been a big push into creating autonomous learners. So I think teachers are going there, which leads me then to also what Susan said. What do we do? How do we go further? What can we do? And I think one aspect, of course, is teacher training. We need to train our teachers in a good way. On a positive side, what we've seen, there's a lot of teacher training in terms of digitalization that has happened during the COVID-19 situation, because principals, teachers have realized that they need training and they need to enhance their knowledge in this aspect. But on the other hand, what I see as one of the challenges, and that's also one of the results from the German quick studies, that there was a huge emphasis on that, but on the expense of other teacher trainings. For example, how to teach to become an autonomous learner, or how to teach students with very diverse backgrounds, students with special needs. Training in these areas have significantly declined because teachers were trained on that. And I think this is haunting us now. And I think that this is something that we need to emphasize. So we need more teacher training also in the various different aspects, and also how teachers can help the more vulnerable students groups. I think that's a very, very important. So teacher training is in my perspective, definitely one of the aspects that we need to emphasize, and that we will also emphasize in future studies that we are conducting. Because similar to Susan, I also see that also national studies sometimes were postponed. So on one hand, you have a need and a hunger for data.
You got frozen. Dirk, we cannot hear you. You got frozen. Perhaps you could shortly turn off your camera so that we can at least hear you.
No, I think he's gone. No.
Now we lost him.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
What a pity. I hope he is going to come back. He is so experienced in dealing with these modern equipments that I'm not afraid that he'll be lost forever. But we can, as a panel, try then to answer a question that came through our... Dirk, you are back again?
Yes, I'm back, but I think I was mostly finished. I didn't know what we heard. I'm in a hotel
okay.
here.
No, but our clock is running as well, but as during two of your last remarks, you were referring to the question of autonomous learning, and as that's one of the questions that was put in the question and answer section as well, how students are being trained to become more autonomous learners. Do you have any experience in this respect or any suggestion on the how? We all agree that it's necessary that, but on the how. So if anybody of our panelists or if Dirk has a convincing answer, I would be ever so happy to hear it.
Can I?
Yes, of course.
This is the most important part of my work now, because the learnhood which I build, it's idea how to create in a families, not only at schools, the society of which helps learning, in fact. And my because it was the most important parts of my work when I were working in universities. My experience shows that even if we try to learn one pupil how to be autonomous learning person, the situation at school and the situation of other pupil in the class, in a society of pupils, will stop it. The children will be shamed using the specific competences of the specific knowledge. And this is not the one example. I have more than 100 examples of it. where the children which really know how to learn themselves decided not to do it because they behave other than the rest of the pupils, and they don't want to be the other person, to feel as an sometimes other than the rest, someone strong. The most important is to build the society of helping learning based on a family, teachers, and the groups of pupils. And this is the only way, as my experience. I'm only talking about it because I don't have any research for that. This is the only way effective in a good distance. For example, when in a class there are 3 or 4 pupils which are together working this way, it could be very effective. But when there's one student, one pupil, he feels not so good, and in my opinion, in Poland, mainly teachers don't understand this situation and don't understand what are you doing, why are you noticing this specific way, or why are you thinking about it and not trying to just to remember it and use your memory, not your thinking. And thousands of these reactions of teachers, very traditional reactions, very old-fashioned reactions, are a big problem. So in fact, the Learnhood, which I prepared, this is a organization when we organize academic of parents. This is the first step, and the second, the training of educational competences for parents, grandparents, the children, and teachers. And when we finish it, we start only how to say it in English? I'm sorry. This individual helpings and problems. Helping finish. That's my answer, as I know, and I wrote on a forum that in fact it's very good. It was very successful when we started to teach teachers how to build the lesson. The reverse lessons. That's all.
I think I also have something to say on some ideas regarding how we can prepare the students to be more autonomous. I think this should be like a collective effort to various actors in education, starting from teachers or even content creators, in making sure that they create content that are easily consumed by learners and that can guide learners without necessarily that the teacher or another facilitator being involved on day-to-day. So that would be one of the ways to ensure that kids are having resources that are tailored to their needs and also to their self-guidance. And the other side, we can also look at the character of learners. Most of these are always curious and are always eager to figure out something new. So using that character of them and then inspire them to use it effectively while they are learning, I think that would also motivate them in order to be more autonomous in terms of developing more learning competences. And also another thing that I think we need to look at or that have to be addressed is on the side of policies, where some of the schools or even the education systems should encourage to accommodate adaptive learning to the schools. where some of learning does not only have to happen in this classroom setup, but motivate learners or even teachers to assist kids to learn from anywhere they are. From there, they will be developing more competences, and that's what will make us more prepared. Let's say if we are not lucky and another crisis hit, we should be able to be well prepared, or to prepare our kids so that they can be able to learn on their own and develop these skills that can enable them to keep up learning from any place they are at.
And, you know, I think that was one of the beauties of the pandemic for so many young people who didn't have much to do in terms of formal schoolwork. And so they got interested in something they heard on the news and pursued it. And I think that that kind of, we call it problem-based learning or project-based learning, is something that the children take to with encouragement. But as Arijne said, they need examples. They need encouragement to use their curiosity to foster their own learning. And so I think that those strategies need to be included in both teacher training and in demonstrating to students how they might do this on their own. Otherwise, we'll be right back where we were if we have to close down again.
So thank you very much for these two last reactions. I get the feeling that they as well answered part of the second question that was put in the question and answer session. And so I'm afraid our time is running out. Am I seeing that right? Isn't that
Yes.
horrible? So I have just time enough now for many thanks to our panelists. And thank you, Dirk, Susan, Dobroslav, Arijne. Thanks to all our guests for being with us during these last 90 minutes. You're invited to visit our website and follow up on social media to learn more about the FWE, to receive notices of upcoming events and to view prior webinars. And I'm especially grateful to all of you for believing in the future in a time that's difficult, in a time where the four horsemen of the apocalypse are threatening us. When the white horse is bringing infectious disease and plague for already 2 years, accompanied by the pale horse bringing the death, and not enough. 2 years ago, one person alone unleashed the red horse, bringing war and civil war, and as well the black horse symbolizing famine, and according to some traditions, continuing abundance for luxuries for the wealthy, while basic foods such as bread is scarce, so not totally depleted. Let education be the tool to overcome disaster and to create a healthy and peaceful world for generations to come. And I'm looking forward to our next webinars continuing on how to deal with this situation. Thanks a lot. All the best to you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much, and particularly to Dirk for having pre-taped his presentation so we could start with that, and also to all of you who are giving information about what's happening in your own country. And I know, Dobroslav, your country is certainly in the news every day for the quality of the response of its citizens to what's happening. So thank you for that. And I know that we're talking as well about doing the same thing in the United States and in other European nations. But your country certainly stood up. And
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And I really have to apologize. I had to leave the Frankfurt airport when I saw the queues and dash to the main station and come by train. So it's good that we have this part by Dirk pre-recorded and that you